Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bold Strokes Books panel, Just a Number, Do Character Ages Matter? And we have a great panel, and I'm Renee Roman. I'll be your moderator today. And we have a wonderful group of authors that I will introduce to you by reading their bios, and then we'll jump right into questions. If you happen to have questions, please be sure to put them in the Q&A box. The chat scroll can move rather quickly, and I don't want to lose your question in the general discussion that's happening. Also, if you click on gallery, you'll be sure to see everyone at the same time. And the little yellow box that you see outlining someone is the person who's speaking at that time. So I think that that's all I have to clue you in on before we get started. So let me pull up my bios, and they're in no particular order. So we'll start with Jaycie. Jaycie Morrison, she, her, traded her big city home of Dallas for the cool beauty of a small Colorado mountain town and hasn't regretted a moment of it. She began her writing career with 3 historical romance novels set during World War II and has since published 3 contemporary romances, the latest of which is On My Way There, a personal journey romance. Jaycie has just signed a contract for her 7th book, tentatively titled Fire Camp. When not writing or reading, Jaycie may be exploring the nearby forest, experimenting with gluten-free cooking, or pretending to be a rock star. Anna Hartnett is an award-winning author of lesbian romance with Bold Strokes Books. She worked in the Pacific Northwest wine industry for 7 years and now lives in her hometown of Atlanta, Georgia. She loves all things fermented or distilled, walking the local trails, and eating pastries. So many pastries.
Of course, yes.
Kimberly Cooper Griffin is a Denver-based award-winning author of lesbian romance novels featuring women who try to nurture love when life gets in the way. Kimberly's work often features her love of the outdoors, Denver, and demonstrates how strong and resilient women are when facing difficult challenges. Regardless of the situation, her characters always work through it with humor and grace and always get their happily ever after. Sam Ledel, she, her, was originally from Dallas-Fort Worth and now resides in Denver, Colorado. Her debut novel, Rocks and Stars, was a Goldie finalist, and her historical romance, Wildflower Words, was a 2023 finalist for LGBTQ plus fiction in the Next Generation Indie Book Awards. Her 9th novel with Bold Strokes Books will be out later this year. Jean Copeland, she, her, is a writer from Southern Connecticut who enjoys being by the water, cocktailing, and cocktailing by the water. She also enjoys pickleball, a sport that has given her new faith in the stereotype that all lesbians are athletic. Pantheon Girls is her 9th novel with Bold Strokes Books and is out now everywhere. Krystina Rivers has been a lover of romance novels since she was too young to read them. She started writing them herself when COVID-19 struck, and she had extra time on her hands with no daily commute or work travel. Krystina is based in Chicago with her wife and their 2 pit bulls that travel so frequently for work that she occasionally forgets what city she's in. She loves books, traveling, yoga, and pretending like she enjoys running, though she finds most activities more enjoyable with a glass of wine in her hand. Perhaps that's why she has to pretend to enjoy running. Her 3rd book, An Atlas to Forever, came out in November, and her 4th book comes out later this year. And now that the introductions are done, we're going to start with our questions that I've prepared, and hopefully you've gotten to a chance to read them. What do you think it is about age that resonates or repels readers? And let's start with Jean.
I write age gap romances because I myself had a thing for older women when I was younger. So, writers have to write what they know or what they wish they knew. But I hear from a lot of people that they like the age gap. They enjoy the age gap. It definitely adds an extra challenge, an extra complication to the conflict. And then I've also heard from readers who like that sometimes you'll find characters in their 60s or 70s. In the second wave, I had, the story opens with two women that were around 70. And it's important to include age because our readers are of all ages, whether they're too young to be reading it, like Krystina was, or they are in their 70s and 80s. So from my experience, I think that keeping age in mind has drawn more readers than it's repelled.
Excellent. Let's go to Sam.
Yeah, thank you. I really liked your
What's your
comments,
thoughts,
Jean, on that. I don't write age gap, and so I'm just going to kind of speak personally to as a reader first. Like growing up, I tended to be drawn to characters around my own age. I think the exception was probably when I was a teenager and I thought I was cooler and older than I was and sought out more mature material. But I think when it comes to age, I was looking for relatable material. So that typically meant characters around my own age, going through things that I could relate to at the time. Although as I've gotten older as a reader, I realize age doesn't really matter as much to me when I'm picking up a book. It's more about the characters themselves or the story that is pulling me in, rather than if a character is going through something in their teens or 20s or later in life. So it's definitely evolved as I've gotten older.
Yeah, I would say that, I think we can probably all relate to our changing views on age and what it means to us. And it's probably true for many of the readers too, that they're more drawn to character and story rather than age.
Mm-hmm.
Anna?
Yeah, age is, I think, like pretty paramount to a story, and it's just hard to separate age from what you're going through and maybe the conflict and the stage of life, and like it brings a lot to the story, or maybe explains a lot about the character themselves. So I think it is hard to like kind of separate age from story. So age is important, at least like when I go into writing a book. The character's age is a big part of the character to me. So I think age is important.
I would agree. Jaycie?
I was just thinking, I think I agree with Sam and Anna. I tend to write a lot of characters in their 20s and 30s because that's a time when people are trying to really kind of figure out who they are and what they want. They can make stupid mistakes. They could do brave things because maybe the long-term consequences aren't so much in their field of vision. But I also feel like the characters have to be relatable no matter what. They've got to have certain strengths or certain weaknesses or flaws or quirks that make their journey something the readers will enjoy.
Thank you. Kimberly?
I think that I used to write a lot of older women when I was younger because it was like who I wanted to be, I guess. And as I get older, I think I start writing younger women. So maybe that's me. My psychology behind it is where you kind of want to see yourself. But I know that having talked to folks that have read some of my stories, that there's a characterization of of the main characters that is most important to it, right? But if you act outside of that age range, they're going to call you on it. And you know, so like if you have an older person that's going around using a lot of slang that's weird, and I use 15-year-old slang because my daughter's 15 years old, but I'm an old lady. You know, cool and awesome are my words, right? But I use a lot of that slang, and so that's part of mine. So I have to be careful of that. So I'm not going to be putting that in my books with my you know, my 40-year-old protagonist saying, you know, any of the new stuff that just goes out of fashion within 5 minutes anyhow. So it's just a matter of whether or not it's believable, I think. I think that any age is great as long as it's believable.
Yeah, that you bring up a good point with characterization being age appropriate and how they present themselves to the world. That's, I think, a very insightful and important part of writing that may get overlooked sometimes. But that's why we're here, because we give options to our readers. Krystina?
So I think, right, there's a lot of different experiences that none of us will ever experience in our lives, but I think the process of getting older is something that everybody hopefully goes through. And I think kind of having different periods of your life that you can relate to different things, even if you can't relate to anything else in the story, you either were that age before or you hopefully will be that age someday. So I think that is kind of something that brings everybody together a little bit because we all go through kind of that shared aging process. I also think, at least for me, growing up, my first crush was on Julie Andrews when she was in The Sound of Music, and then Mary Poppins, and I still have a gigantic crush on her, even though she's 80. So I kind of wonder if there's like a little bit of that in everybody, because when we're young and we don't really realize that maybe we are a little gay on the inside or a lot gay on the inside, like we develop these crushes and they kind of stick with us. And I think that helps us visualize an age gap romance in a way that maybe we otherwise wouldn't.
Very true. I see there's a couple of questions in the Q&A, and I'm going to jump to that right now. Linda is asking, what is your youngest to oldest characters? Let's start with Jaycie.
In The Found Jar, I had a character who was in her late 30s, and she got involved with someone who was in their mid 20s. So that was my age gap story, and that's the closest I've come to an age gap, I guess. I guess 10, almost 10 years counts, right? I know we always talk about what counts as an age gap, but my youngest character is in my most recent release, On My Way There, when I track the character of Maxine Terrell. She starts pretty much in high school. There's some flashbacks to her youth, and then she continues on her journey into her late 20s.
Thank you. Kimberly.
As far as age gap goes, I just wrote my first real age gap. Some of the age gaps in my books are maybe about, you know, I don't think 10 years is a big age gap. There's a 13-year-old difference between me and my wife. So, you know, I just don't feel like that's a major age gap, but just wrote one's 15 years between the two characters. One's in their late 20s and one's almost 50. And that does play into the book quite a bit. They talk about not getting together because of their age differences, and it's mostly on the older characters' part because they feel like that the younger person probably wants somebody with a little bit more youth in there. And but most of my characters in all my books, they range between their probably their low 20s to their late 40s, and I have fun with every one of them.
Yeah, I can relate to that, certainly. Anna?
Yeah, in terms of age gap, I've only written, I mean, I guess one technically, but it was only 10 years, so kind of like what Kimberly was saying, it's not like the biggest age gap. And it was a like work romance, so I think more like the boss employee relationship played more of a role in that conflict than the age did. Because it was a 30-year-old and a 40-year-old, I believe, in Crush. But yeah, I've written as young as a freshman in college, so however old that is, 18, I think. And then up to 40 so far, but four out of those five books were all college books, so I'm gonna keep getting older. But yeah, I look forward to it for sure. But yeah, only 10 years for me.
Okay, Krystina.
Similar to Anna, the biggest age gap I've written is I think about 10 years. An Atlas to Forever, which is my book that just came out. One of the main characters is like in her early 30s, and the other one is in her early 40s. And it is a little bit of an issue, not like a big issue, but it does play into it when Ellie, the older character, is saying that, the veterinarian that she's kind of thinking about pursuing is way too young for her, blah, blah, blah. I am a little bit afraid to write characters that are too young. In my release that I have coming out later this year, The Heart Wants, I have characters who start out in their early 20s. I think one's 22 and the other one's 24. But then kind of throughout the book, we kind of see them when they're in their early 20s, their late 20s, their like mid 30s, and then kind of their early 40s. And so as they kind of bounce in and out of each other's lives, like we get to see them at different points. So that's kind of a fun one because they get to grow from barely adults into real adults in the real world. I'm a little bit afraid to write any younger than 22, and honestly, I don't know if I would do that again because I just don't know if I can quite capture 22 very well because I've just been away from my 20s for too long, and I don't know that many people who are in college. Like I've got nieces and nephews, but I don't want to portray it incorrectly. So I don't know if I would write that young again.
Yeah, I think, we all have to take into consideration how comfortable we are with a certain age and whether we want to dive in and write that and whether we can write it authentically. And you make a very valid point. Jean?
Thinking about my books, my past books as listening to everyone else, and I have like my debut novel was historic fiction that started with the character at 17 and she falls in love with a 30-year-old because it was the coming of age kind of thing. And for the first half of the story, it was forbidden and the older character just kind of put the kibosh on it because of that 13-year age difference. But then in the second half of the book, they meet again later on when everybody's legal. So the even though there's 13 years, it's suddenly not so much of an issue anymore like it was in the first half of the book. And then in my third novel, Summer Fling, I have a Maine in her late 40s who reluctantly falls for someone around 30. And that's, it's about 17, 18 years, but the problem is not the age gap, it's where they are in their lives. Kate, the 48-year-old, had just gotten out within that last year of the ending of a long-term relationship. And Jordan, the girl that she meets and falls in love with, is really ready to try on her adult relationship for the first time. So she's all gung-ho about it, stars in her eyes. But Kate is pretty well jaded after her life experience. So I will probably again explore another age gap because they seem to be a fun, comfortable place for me. And then in terms of ages of characters, like I said, 17 was the youngest in the Revelation of Beatrice Darby, and it takes her to about 28. And then in the second wave, I open the story with two 70-year-old women. And it kind of, the story goes back a little bit to give you some of their time getting to know each other during the 70s women's movement. And then the story comes back to being in their early 70s. So I'm like all over the map with age, because it isn't just a number to me. It really represents stages and phases in our lives that we grow through, not only go through, but grow through. Because, if usually somebody is a different person 10 years, 20 years down the road from where they were when they were 25. So it's just an interesting journey type thing that I really enjoy exploring.
Thank you. Yes, it's certainly an intriguing part of the character development through a story, and an integral part overall. So thank you. Sam?
First, I really like that phrase "grow through." I liked that a lot. And I feel a little bit listening to everybody. I feel like I might be the outlier here in terms of my characters' ages and writing age gaps. I haven't written that really. I was looking back at my books to kind of refresh myself on character ages. But I knew everyone was pretty close in age generally in all of my books. The biggest age gap I could find was 3 years, maybe 4 years between characters. I don't really know why that is. Perhaps my own personal dating history factors into that. And I think it is interesting the dynamics that can come into play with an age gap romance. I do find those really sort of intriguing. I just haven't done it yet myself. And the youngest character I've written is college age going into college, so 18. And that was a coming of age story. So, could kind of have the messy, angsty dynamics that come with being a young adult, compared to my other novels, which have characters in their 20s and 30s. So my characters have gotten a little bit older with all of the books I've written, perhaps because I'm getting older with as I write these books. And maybe it goes to write what you know. I know what it's like to be a young adult and making questionable decisions. I know what it's like to be in my 20s where maybe I feel confident in things, but I still don't really know how things are working. And I also know the ease and comfort that comes with being in my 30s and being a little more comfortable in who I am and my identity. And so to what some of my fellow panelists were saying, I think age does inform character quite a bit, and the way that they view the world and the decisions that they can make. And I think writing characters of similar ages, for me, I think part of why I enjoy doing that is that there can be kind of a general familiarity in language, and the world that they've grown up in, the technology they've been around. Even if there's different backgrounds for the characters, I write a lot of class disparity in my novels. So even if they are from different social demographics, the characters have generally been around the same language. They've been experiencing the same world events. So of course, there's still going to be miscommunication between them at times, but they have common language to use with one another to find common ground again.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. We have some more questions in the Q&A, and I'd like to jump to that. This time I'll read the question, and whoever wants to answer, if you just want to let me know by raising your hand, that would be great. Let's try. It's important to include those ages. We are still active, so she must be referring to older characters. You may not like to hear that, but we are still active in the bedroom. Your thoughts on that? So anybody would like to jump in and answer that? Let me know.
I have something to say for that one. I just my newest release, Lost Harbor, is about a couple of women that were nuns when they were younger, and they grow through the book, and it picks up again when they're retired out of a convent, but they're not retired. It's a 25-year time span, and they actually get kicked out of the convent. But it was different to write them when they were younger and what they were experiencing as far as love and lust and all that other stuff. And then they get to be older. And I was actually worried that I was going to offend people, that these people were going to be sexually active and having good sex. But more of it was because they were nuns versus them being older. But it was something that I had to write around to figure out whether or not their characters and who they were, being nuns and being attracted to one another inside of a convent when they're younger, and as they get older and they have the freedom to be able to express themselves physically that way. And I was worried that some people would be a little bit offended by that. Do you make the nuns go after it, or do you make them a little bit cautious about, offending, the higher powers, so I think it was more about their own journey rather than their age in that.
Excellent. Jean?
Yeah, I can relate to what Kimberly said. In the second wave, the older the couple is in their early 70s, and I had a hard time envisioning how to do a sex scene with that. And I think I was afraid of not being familiar with seeing it on TV or seeing it in movies. You rarely see, even heterosexual couples, you rarely see that age in intimate, sexually intimate situations. It's usually an older man and a younger woman, or vice versa, but rarely do we see real legit older couples who are in love still being sexually active. I think in our society, for some reason, there's like this ick factor on the visual perception of it, even though we all know it happens, it goes on all the time. But I think it was my lack of experience as a writer, and because it was my second novel at the time, but also being that it was just something that was not familiar to me, and my own comfort level in how readers would interpret it. Do they want to just see these sweet old ladies just fall in love and live happily ever after with their tea on the front porch, or are they ready to see them getting down and dirty in the bedroom or kitchen or wherever?
I like your sense of adventure. We're not dead. We're just getting older.
That's right.
Bring on that down and dirty. I'm all for it.
Me too. Anyone else? Okay, we'll go on to another question that I had. Do you consider age when you craft a character, or the type of relationship based on the storyline that they'll have? And let's start with Krystina.
I do. I think you have to. And I know Sam kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier. I think Kimberly mentioned this a little bit earlier, and hell, everybody might have mentioned a little bit earlier. But you really have to write a character authentic for the age that they are. So when I'm starting a book, when I'm like doing a character sketch, which is kind of one of the first things when I'm like plotting out a book, right? I kind of have an idea, and then I figure out who's going to fit into that idea, and then I go from there. Like, age is maybe the second thing that I like write down about them, because I think that's going to define everything about how they behave. Maybe not everything, but a lot about how they're going to behave, how they're going to react to certain things. Right. Somebody said earlier, right, when you get into your 30s, you're generally speaking, hopefully more comfortable in your own skin and with who you are, versus when you're 22, unless you are incredibly lucky and already know who you are and have zero struggles with your sexuality when you're young. So yeah, I think you kind of have to think about the age, because that is going to help to shape your character.
I would totally agree with that. Jaycie?
Yeah, I was thinking about the age gap question too, in terms of when you envision a character, who you envision them with. Are they going to be close to the same age or different from the same age? And sometimes it's almost more like when I'm creating a character, or the relationship that's going to exist between two characters, it's almost more like, is there going to be a gap in their experience? Are we talking like, a small town girl versus a big city girl, that kind of thing? I think that can be almost as important as their actual age, is their experience, their background, and where they see themselves going. So yeah, I envision a character at sort of a iffy age, but it kind of develops as I think more about the story itself.
Thank you. Let's go to Sam.
I definitely consider age when I'm crafting the beginning of my story. I'm initially influenced usually by setting. That's what kind of gets a story idea going in my head. And then the characters kind of fall into place after that. But with my fantasy, I did 20-year-old protagonist in their 20s. That kind of seemed to fit the sense of adventure for that set of books, and the potential for growth and change for those character arcs over the series. With my historical romances, the women have been in their 20s and 30s, which I think is really important to think about, especially in a historical context, and what was expected of a woman of a certain age. Even at 20, perhaps she was already expected to be married with a couple of kids at that point. And so what does that do to a woman in a particular time period who isn't, fitting into that social norm? How does that affect the way other people see her and how she sees herself? So I absolutely consider age with my books.
Thank you. Anna?
Yeah, definitely agree with Sam on this. And someone just dropped a comment in the chat, Raven. Yes, so I totally agree with Raven as well. I think like with age, especially writing like college romances, like that is such a huge part of the character, is how young they are. And like Raven said, their brain isn't even fully developed yet. Like, so there's a lot more space to be messy, to be selfish, to get into like, situations where we're all shaking our heads reading it because we are not 18. But that comes with the territory. So that changes not only the whole character, but the whole story itself. So I really don't see how you can separate age from character or the story. So yeah, I think I agree with what everyone's been saying.
Thanks. Jean?
Yeah, I will usually I get story ideas first based on a relationship between two people. Like I'll hear two people just start talking, and then I'll decide what I'm going to do with these people. And so age definitely is part of it for me. In my current novel that's out now, Pantheon Girls, I chose, because it's like a love affair among friends as well as an actual, romance. I break the book down into 3 time periods. The first one is when they all meet as teenagers. And then the second part is when they're kind of at that 30-ish. And then the third part is kind of right present, and I use my own age as the model because I was an 80s teenager, and I love that time period, and I love everything that went into developing, Gen X. And so I wanted to explore that a little bit. And so to see the teenagers, how goofy they are, how uptight they are about discovering their sexuality, especially during a time period when it was, almost like social suicide to come out of the closet in the mid 80s. so it's then I and you know, then it moves into the 90s where things are different, things are changing. There's not where we are right now, but they're better. And so I just love kind of marking the passage of their rites of passage with time throughout the novel. So yeah, age is always a huge factor. In when I'm developing the characters, which then lead to, okay, now that I know who these people are, what am I going to have them do? So it's pretty significant for me as well.
Thanks. Kim?
It's, to me, the age is very significant. When I usually do my character sketches, I almost immediately go to their age before I do hair color or eye color or height or, even their backstory, and then build it from there. And I'm very much a planner when I'm writing, so that that all that stuff kind of links up. But then again, when you get into the age of it, my first book with Bold Strokes, No Experience Required, was about a woman who was in her 40s who had very little experience in relationships because she was worried about her neurodivergence. She had bipolar disorder, and she didn't get into relationships because she was afraid. And through the book, she has to evolve into being able to do that. And she's very immature with her relationships because she hasn't had those. And I've had some reviews bring that up, that she was a very immature character, and she was, and that was that was done on purpose. And then I'm co-writing a book right now with I finished it, just turned it in with Nicole Disney, and it's two characters who have an age gap, and one was in her is in her late 20s, and the other character is in her late 40s. And I'll let you guess who got to be the younger one and the older one if you know who Nicole is. But anyhow, we changed the age of the younger one because the idea, I mean, the reality of life is when you're younger, the age matters more, because of the learning curve being so steep at that point of just life and experience. And so we moved her up a little bit because we didn't want her to be so immature within this relationship with this other person. So it was a very we still wanted the age gap of 15 years, but we wanted to make sure that that age gap wasn't also an experience gap that was so big that was uncomfortable for the readers. So it really depends on the backstory of the character and where they are in life. I've got 15-year-olds right now talking. I just heard them say something about a dental dam. When I was 15, I didn't talk about safe sex with anything, and here they are, 15 years old, batting it around in my living room. So anyhow, it's a time change thing. It evolves. So
It most certainly does. And that brings up a point that I didn't really think about, but it sounds like for a lot of you, you write a story over quite a time frame from the beginning to the end. Some of you say, you first meet up with your characters and they're in their 20s, and then in their 30s, and then in their 40s. So I don't, how do you decide how much time you're going to cover in a story with these two characters? Do you just want to show one little glimpse of their life? Are you out for the bigger picture of, look at where they started and this is how they ended? What's your take on that? And if everybody wants to answer, I'll just start calling on someone. How about Sam?
I was actually going to say I might defer to everybody else here as I have
Well,
not.
you still can.
Yes, I was thinking of a few. Oh, I lost my train of thought. But some books I've read recently where there is a wide span of time that is covered, and I that's something I admire and something I might do eventually, to be able to really. I think that's a wonderful way to get insight on character growth and, regrets and decisions that were made over the course of time, and where the character ends up versus where they started. I usually span only a year or so in my books. So I will sit back and listen to everybody else on this one.
Well, thank you. Krystina.
Mine is driven by kind of that initial like spark for the idea that I have for the book. So my first book, Something Between Us, it's a reunion romance. The two characters meet in, I think, 2008. They're both serving in the military under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And so it's Don't Ask, Don't Tell that drives them apart. And the whole premise of the idea came to me of them meeting up in today, 15 years later at the time. And like, it's told in a flashback. So the 2009 parts, there's only a few flashbacks in the story that you get to that, and the primary period is still in today. The other two books that I have just kind of take place over the course of, I don't know, 5 or 6 months or something. But my one that I'm coming out later this year, that one was one that I just thought it'd be kind of fun to play off of a similar Don't Ask, Don't Tell theme from, I think they meet back in 09 or 10. And it's like right before the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And so they, like, the one character isn't in the military, the other character is in the military. And so they kind of fall in love a little bit, as you do when you're like 22. But then Don't Ask, Don't Tell keeps them from getting together. And then we see them again in their, I think, late 20s. And then that obviously they can't get together yet because it was too long ago, and I wanted it to be a contemporary romance, so I kind of brought them through the years until 2024. So this year is their big year that they're going to fall in love and get back together. So it really is completely driven by kind of the idea for the story for me. Right, if you have two people in a close quarters, it may be a couple weeks, right, or a few days or a few hours or whatever, but it's all kind of driven by the idea for the story itself, for me anyway.
Thank you. Anybody else care to chime in on that one? Jean?
I've had stories that the time period, the whole novel takes place, within less than a year. And then my longest one is there's a 40-year span. But again, it does have to do with what is it about the characters and their connection you want to show. A coming of age story would have to take about 10 years or so, especially if they start out as an 18-year-old and you want to bring them up to the point where, I've kind of figured life out. I'm kind of there. And then also I also love period pieces, historic fiction. So if you're going to kind of keep a little bit of, you want to keep that modern spin to it, I just chose like a nonlinear approach where the story starts in the present, and then as the chapters go on, their backstories, which are relevant to the current story, just start to unfold as the reader goes along. So it's like peeling that onion, and the reader gets to go deeper and deeper into their stories and their past, and how they were when they were younger versus now.
That's true. And we have such a talented group of authors that cover a wide range of ages and age groups, and hopefully everyone finds something that they enjoy reading, whether it's a coming of age story, which is certainly way beyond where I am in my life right now, or someone who is just finding out that their attraction is newborn, and it doesn't matter if they're 30 or 40 or 50 or 60. And I think that is part of the appeal of having so many writers get their stories on the page. We have time for one more question from the audience, and then we're going to do a speed round of what's coming out next for you. So I'll read the question. Anna mentioned, this is from Mary Burns. Anna mentioned 18-year-olds and young people in general are messy. Do authors think older women in their 40s and 60s can be messy, can be just as messy despite seemingly having it together and having more life experience? Will readers accept stumbling in a main character of those ages? So let's start with Kimberly.
I think, yeah. I mean, if you're a good writer, you can write it all. I think that when we talk about coming of age, usually it's, from a sexual point of view, right? But there's coming of age of being responsible in a relationship or raising a kid or going through a divorce or retiring, that kind of stuff. Coming of age is coming of age, regardless of what age you're at. And so it's about being believable. And that messiness is what we live for in these books, right? I mean, characters should be flawed. They should have something that's wrong with them. Otherwise, they're too perfect. And, I almost said Barbie, but even Barbie now is so flawed. And I mean, we have a whole movie on Barbie that's wonderful. But yeah, coming of age and messiness is inherent in every age, I think. It's just making it believable and not doing stereotypes. We talk a little bit about being age appropriate, but why do we have to make people that are older not so interested in things that they were when they were younger, regardless of whether or not it's relationships, sex, or playing softball anymore? Let's make our characters diverse as we are.
Excellent. Anyone else care to answer?
Yeah,
Anna?
I think Kimberly made a great point. And yes, Mary, of course. Yeah, I think everyone is messy. Isn't that like the secret that we all find out when we grow up, is we're just as messy as we were before? But I do think an interesting difference is, like, if you're writing younger characters, especially younger characters that have the privilege of not having so much life stress on them. Like, I wrote a college series, so my characters were privileged enough to be able to have a college experience, which it almost makes it more insular of a story. And because they have the space to be as messy as those teenagers want to be, whereas when you're growing up, your character has, maybe parents that are getting older and life pressures and a job. So it just, like, is kind of a different shade of messy. But yes, all the messiness, please, all the time. But so I agree with Mary in that. It's, yeah, the mess doesn't go away. It just kind of, yeah, morphs.
Exactly. It's the exact word I was going to come up with, morphs. Anyone else want to answer? Okay, we have a couple of minutes, so we're going to start with Jean. What's up next for you? And when will it come out?
Charity Case is my next one, and Sandy Lowe has been very patient with me because I've had to stop it and start it quite a lot over the last 6 months. So hopefully early 2025, and it's a contemporary romance, not a huge age gap, just a lot of misunderstanding and hijinks and trying to cover your secrets until the new person falls in love with you, and then you feel safe enough to reveal them.
Excellent. Sam?
I am actually in the second round of edits for a historical romance that is based in Southern California in the 1920s. It is a romance between a rum smuggler and a pickpocket who has fallen into the temperance movement. So I'm really excited about that one. That will be out in May this year.
Sounds fun. Krystina?
I mentioned it earlier, but my book that comes out later this year is called The Heart Wants, and that's about two people who meet in their early 20s. One just graduated from West Point. One is doing a study abroad in Italy. and they meet and they start developing feelings for each other. But the one from West Point is very, very rigid with her rules. I can tell you, I served under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and I was not nearly as rigid as she was with her rules and not getting involved with another woman. But it ends up driving them apart. They meet again when they're both in grad school, and then they meet again in a random hotel, and then they meet again in the present day. And so it just kind of talks about how their lives kind of interweave with each other. So I'm really excited about that one. And then that's in edits. I'm waiting on my first round of comments. And then I just started writing a WNBA romance.
Excellent. Kimberly.
Well, the third book in the Oceana series came out, it comes out in February. That's Lost Harbor, and that's about the nuns, the 25 years later after getting kicked out of a convent. I just finished writing, and we're waiting for the first round of edits for a book called Exposure that I co-wrote with Nicole Disney, and that's the age gap romance, contemporary romance between two women who meet each other at doing gig work in a delivery service, and how that works. And then just turned in the first draft of a book called Accidentally in Love, which is a book I actually started writing 20 years ago, and picked it up again just recently because it just felt good. And that one is just a contemporary romance about it's a enemies to lovers book, office romance.
Could you try again?
It's Siri was talking to me. But yeah, so there's 3 books coming out.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Jaycie?
Yeah, I think I mentioned in my bio the one I'm working on right now is called Fire Camp, or tentatively called Fire Camp. It's based on a group of women that I actually met who were doing a fire mitigation program in the forest back behind me here. And great gals, really enjoyed getting to know them and just respected the heck out of what they were doing. So I thought I need to write about them. So that's what I'm trying to do. Not too far into it, but the characters are about the same age, but they want really, really different things from their future, like totally opposite things. So even though they fall in love at fire camp, they are honest about what they want. And when they split up due to the typical misunderstanding, they don't ever think that they'll meet up again, but then they do. And it is a time gap of about 15 years. And they're both dealing with what's going on in the forest and what's going on in their lives. So looking forward to finishing it soon, I hope.
Well, thank you. And Anna?
Yeah, I just started my edits for Comes in Waves, which is a contemporary romance, and it's a second chance romance. The main character lives in a small beach town with not a ton going on, mostly fishing. And she falls for a real estate developer's daughter who's there some summers while her parents are striking deals. And so the first part of the book takes place while they're teenagers, and then they are pen pals throughout. And then the second part of the book is them as adults.
Sweet. Well, thank you all so much for being here and letting me host this panel for you all. It's been a pleasure. And to the audience, thank you so much for your participation, your comments, your questions. Don't forget, there's a couple more coming up this evening. And don't forget, there's a 20% discount on books available through Bold Strokes Books. And get your copies today, folks. Thanks so much. And have a great evening.
Thank you, Renee.
Thanks, Renee.